Hello and welcome to 2-Minute Talk Tips. I'm Bill Monroe. This week's tip, check your background with your cell phone. This weekend I had to record some simple presentation video for a project I was working on. So I cleared out my space, I figured out where in my office I was going to stand, and I got ready to shoot. I want to make sure everything was positioned okay so that I could see the monitor and my computer all in frame where I was standing. So I took out my cell phone and took a picture of the space. Now, I had thought I had cleaned up pretty well, but once I looked at the scene through my camera phone, I was amazed at just how much junk was cluttering up that area. I mean, the thing is, all of that junk was in the background the whole time. It's all there, but the brain is weird, and when I looked at it just with my eyes, I just didn't see it. But once I looked at it in the picture, it was obvious. Something about a picture made my brain not ignore that stuff. So before you do an important talk, check your background, and then check it again by taking a picture of it. Even better, ask someone else to take a picture of you standing where you'll stand so that you can see how the whole scene will look to your audience. Apply the rule of thirds to the image to abstract it a little bit more and make it easier to see the details. For the rule of thirds, imagine that there are two vertical lines separating that picture into three equal columns. Then imagine two horizontal lines separating that image into three horizontal rows. And some camera phones will actually put those lines on the image for you. Basically, you want to divide the scene up like the opening of the Brady Bunch. And now that you have 9 actual or imagined squares on that photo, look at each of those squares and identify any physical changes you need to make to your space. Stick around. And after the break, we're going to talk about the power of digital ink. Digital ink really started to become a thing in the early 2000s when it first appeared on tablet PCs running Windows XP Tablet Edition. For PowerPoint, ink actually made its first appearance in an add-on to Microsoft Office XP. Digital ink is a way of using a digital pen on your PC display to mark up content on the screen or to take notes. I've actually been conducting training on it for more than 15 years, so I'm actually kind of a little surprised that I haven't talked about it extensively on this podcast already. But of course, the challenge is that this is a visual topic in an auditory medium, so please bear with me. There are two main contexts for using ink in PowerPoint. They are reviewing content and presenting content. Let's start by talking about reviewing content. I like to use ink when I review slide drafts. Now, I could sit in front of my monitor at my desk and use my mouse and keyboard to navigate around and to proofread and to type comments and use the special comment bubbles that are part of the reviewing feature, and that does work, kind of. Personally, I find it more effective to actually sit on the couch and look at the content that way. In the past, I might have done that with pen and paper, but now I do it with a tablet. Sitting in a different place in my office and in a different position helps me shift my context to look at things with a more critical eye. Suddenly, I'm less likely to see things that I think should be there and see things as they actually are. I mean, there's value in just not doing this at my desk and doing it someplace else. To use ink, open up a slide deck in the Slide Sorter view and click on the Draw tab, and then choose Draw with Touch. For detailed notes, you'll want to use a digital pen from an ink-enabled PC, or at the very least, a stylus and a touch screen. You can use your finger, but I find it's a lot harder to be precise with your comments. But once you have that function enabled, now you can write on the slides. And not just on top of the slides, but in the gray space around the slides. So as I sit back on the couch and go through slides with my pen in hand and my tablet in my lap, I can do things like make comments on bullet points or diagrams. I can circle typos. If I have a question about something, I can just write out the question right on the slide. I can even go ahead and pull up some blanks and then just roughly sketch additional slides. And there's more that I can do by just writing on top of those slides. And then once I've done that, I can save all of that ink and I can go back to my desk and make the changes that I wrote about in ink. Or I can send that now annotated slide deck back to the author with my comments, and then they can make changes. So that's pretty cool. I can also do that in Word and in other Office applications and in an assortment of other ways as well. But I think it's really valuable to just have that context shift of physically sitting in a different place to put myself in a different mindset for reviewing stuff. But ink isn't just about reviewing content. It's also about presenting content. Ink can be such a powerful tool during presentations. I'm one of those folks who are old enough to remember overhead projectors and transparencies. Folks used to be able to set these up, print out their graphics and their text on transparent sheets, and then project them to a room. And then they could even take a grease pencil and draw on top of those transparencies. I remember first encountering these projecting behemoths back in grade school, and they looked awesome back then to my first and second grade eyes, with that funky overhead periscope-like head and that super curved lens. And then the teacher would fire it up and project stuff on the blackboard. I remember one time there was a teacher that needed to enlarge a graphic of some sort for either a class play or a classroom decoration. I don't recall the detail. And she projected it onto a piece of paper that she had taped to the blackboard. And then she traced the image. It was like magic. She took this regular sized piece of paper of an image, projected it, and then redrew it so much larger. I mean, this thing was really cool. Later on, I used one of these overhead projectors as part of a class project in college, where I showed a bunch of data that I had tabulated in Lotus 123. Everyone thought I was, pretty weird for doing that, and that was far from the only time they thought that, but, that's another story. The point is, this is how we used to project data and text and images, and we could use grease pencils on those transparencies to mark them up and call attention to things or sketch things out. Eventually, laptops, digital projectors, Harvard graphics, and later on, PowerPoint would seem to kill that kind of live, dynamic presentation. Now, of course, there were still things like document cameras and Elmo devices that allowed a presenter to show physical objects on the screen, and that was pretty cool, but it did become less common, and we were left with, static slides, animation, and video. And all of that stuff had to be pre-prepared. The presenter had to have all of those slides already ready to go in advance. That all began to change with digital ink during presentations in the early 2000s, which is becoming more and more common with ink-enabled PCs today. You can enable it easily. When you're in slideshow mode, which you typically are during a presentation, you can simply turn on the ink annotations. And you can find a picture of this menu at 2minutetalktips.com/ink. But what you'll want to do is hover your mouse, your pen, or your stylus over the left-hand lower corner of the screen. Down there, you'll see a series of transparent icons, arrows for navigating in your slide deck, some menu options, and a pen icon. Click the pen, and you'll see an option for a laser pointer, a highlighter, and a pen. The laser pointer, of course, simulates a laser pointer, so it will project a bright red spot on the screen where you are indicating with your stylus or your finger or your mouse. The highlighter will let you draw on top of other stuff, and that other stuff will still show through, just like a highlighter in a college textbook. Now the pen, that lets you draw ink right on top of the slide for your whole audience to see. You can use different thicknesses of pen tip. You can use different colors of ink. This is the feature that I use the most. The functionality works best with a pen-enabled device, but you can also use a stylus or a finger on a touchscreen as well. And if you're really good, you can draw with your mouse. So now that we've talked about turning on the tool, let's talk about how to use the tool. At its most basic, I use digital ink during slideshows for emphasis. When I talk about a particular bullet point on a slide, I may draw a circle around it, or I may flag it with a check mark. As I'm going through a series of bullets or a series of items on a slide, I might continue to mark them off to help the audience see where I am and what I'm talking about. And especially if something is really important, I may circle it 3 or 4 or 5 times to really emphasize that. And it gives a nice additional piece of visual feedback that the audience can consume. If I'm teaching about an object, I might put a picture of that on the slide, and then I will circle part of that object as I'm talking about it, or I might draw an arrow towards a specific part of it. A few years ago, I was teaching a PC fundamentals course, and I needed to talk about the different ports and connections that are on a laptop computer. So what I would do is I would put a picture of those ports and those connections onto a slide, or as I went around the diagram, or went around the room and involved the audience in the process, I would write the name of each port next to it. Or I would even have an audience member come up and write the name of the port on the screen itself, and then everybody can see that on the big display. If somebody asks me a question or there's something I need to follow up on for an audience member, I can actually go ahead and just write that question or that follow-up note directly on the slide. This accomplishes 2 things. First of all, that note is right there, right as it's come up. I don't need to remember to write it down later. This way, I don't forget it. Plus, since now the audience sees that question or that follow-up on the slide projected for everyone to see, they also know just how seriously I am taking this follow-up action. And of course, using it as a virtual whiteboard is also a really powerful way of using digital ink. I can put a blank slide right in the middle of my slide deck where I want to take the audience into a brainstorming activity. Or I could put 2 blank slides, or 3, or 4, or however many I need. So now what I'll do is I'll have just a blank slide projected in front of the entire audience. Or maybe I'll still have my logo on it, or I'll just have the title on that title slide on it. Whatever it is, it gives me a lot of flexibility, and I can just have this now whiteboard, and we can brainstorm ideas. We can list out plans. I can collect input from the audience as their suggestions and write them right on my screen, and it shows up on the big screen for everybody to see. I can go ahead and draw a picture, or I can sketch out a chart. Or even if I'm in the middle of a presentation and somebody asks me a question that I think I can illustrate with ink, I can always exit slideshow mode briefly, add in a blank slide, go back into slideshow mode, and now I've got a blank canvas that I can draw my chart or my explanation or whatever it is to answer that question from the audience. And then after this presentation is completed, I can go ahead and share this deck with all of these notes and all of these annotations with the audience by simply uploading the PowerPoint file or emailing that slide deck out, or however I need to share that. See, there are lots of options for adding new elements to your presentation, going through and doing this live and annotating during the slideshow. And then at the end of your presentation, when you go to exit your show, PowerPoint is going to ask you what you want to do with that ink. Do you want to keep your ink annotations, or do you want to discard them? If you keep them, they become a part of that file, and they are there until you manually delete them. This is great when you want to keep a record of all those annotations, that whiteboarding session, those lists of ideas, those questions, those notes. The other option is you can discard them. And if you discard those annotations, they will disappear completely from that file, and your file is back to the way it was when you first began your slideshow. You're more likely to want to do this if you're going to use that exact same file again and again. Perhaps you're doing 4 or 5 identical sessions during the day. You want to use that same file, so you would probably want to discard your annotations in between sessions. But really, whether you keep them or discard them, it's going to depend on what you are trying to accomplish and what you are doing on that particular day. The key thing is annotations are fun and they are powerful. They help you further engage your audience as you create new stuff on the screen live in front of them. Your ink helps them see that they are part of a unique experience. This exact presentation will never happen again, and they got to be a part of it. With annotations in slide sorter mode, you can better review and edit your slides. You can apply a critical eye to your or someone else's deck and catch more stuff earlier and fix it before any audience sees it. With annotations in slideshow mode, you get an interactive, engaging, and a unique experience. So try ink annotations out in your next presentation and let us know how it goes. Do you currently use digital ink? Tell us about it in the comments at 2minutetalktips.com/ink. If you want more tips and commentary on public speaking each week, subscribe to 2-Minute Talk Tips in your favorite podcast app. Use your camera phone to preview your next presentation spot. And, as always, don't get best. Get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
Two-Minute Talk Tips is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.